Hi there, it's Denise from LoomaHat.com, and in this video I want to show you how to knit a mesh cover for your bottle. For a list of supplies and more information, see the description or visit the website. Alright, let's begin with the drawstring cast on. You're going to start by securing the working yarn to your anchor peg, and I'm going to be doing a really easy, simple knot. You can do a slip knot if you prefer. Then you're going to take that working yarn between pegs 1 and 24, in between those two, and then bring it forward between pegs 1 and 2, and then you're just going to come in and out. You're going to zigzag between every other peg until you're back at the front of the loom, and then you're going to take your working yarn and you're going to take it behind peg 1 and bring it over in front of peg 2. Now let me show you what it should look like up to now. Alright, and now you're going to lay that working yarn loosely over the pegs, and with your hook you're going to knit off every peg with 2 loops. In other words, you're knitting off every other peg. Continue knitting off every other peg until you're back at the front of the loom. You're going to knit off peg 24, and you're not going to knit peg 1. Only this time you're going to skip peg 1 and you're going to take your working yarn over to peg 2. You're going to half wrap the peg and knit off. We're doing a U-wrap version of the knit stitch, and you're going to continue knitting the U-wrap around the entire loom. So again, you half wrap, knit off, half wrap, knit off. Once you knit off peg 24, you're done with your cast on, and we're ready to move on to row 1. Okay, so before you do that, you do want to remove the knot from your anchor peg, and then you're going to knit 12 rows of the U-wrap knit stitch. So half wrap and knit off, half wrap, knit off. Continue knitting in the round, and then we're ready for the mock mesh stitch. This stitch is done over 3 pegs, and you're going to start by setting up your loom. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to knit 2 stitches. This is only to set up your loom, and you're not going to knit these 2 stitches again. You're going to move on from these 2 stitches to the mesh stitch, which you're going to knit continuously around in a circle. Alright, so there's the second stitch, and now your working yarn is on peg 2. This is peg 1, this is peg 2. You're going to take your stitch and you're going to take it back to peg 1 and wrap peg 1. You're going to skip peg 2, go to peg 3 and wrap peg 3, and then you need to knit off the pegs that have 2 stitches. So take your loop from the bottom over the top, loop from the bottom over the top, and that is the mock mesh stitch. This peg is now your new peg 2, and you start the process again. You take the working yarn back 1 peg, wrap that peg, skip peg 2, wrap peg 3, and you're going to knit off the pegs with 2 loops. So I'm knitting off here, I knit off here, and now I'm going to repeat the process. This is my new peg 2, and I'm going to go back to peg 1, over to peg 3, and skip that one. It's worked over 3 pegs, but you're knitting every one of your pegs. I know it looks like you skip a peg, and you do, but remember that when you start the process again, you're going back to knit that one. So that's your new peg 2. You're going to wrap peg 1, skip peg 2, wrap 3, and you're going to knit off. And don't worry about the order of knitting off. I tend to knit off 3 first just to secure my yarn. When you knit off peg 24, that will complete your first row of the mock mesh stitch. Here's peg 1, so you're back at the beginning, and now you're ready to start a second row. Keep going. You need 10 rows of the mock mesh stitch. You're welcome to do more or less. 3 rows will give you 2 inches of fabric. Next, knit 2 rows of the U-wrap knit stitch. Alright, let me take this moment to give you a heads up. You're now going to start knitting flat. You will be doing decreases and will now switch to the rib stitch. Don't panic, I'm gonna explain. To knit flat just means you go back and forth instead of in the round. To do decreases, you're going to first knit 2 and then bind off 1. Much easier than it sounds. And for the rib stitch, it's nothing more than doing 1 knit and 1 purl. Alright, stay with me, you can do this. Here is peg 1, here's 24. Usually you go from 24 to 1. Not this time because we're not knitting in the round, we're going to knit flat. So you're going to take your working yarn and go in the opposite direction, and you are going to knit peg 24 again. And remember, first we need to do 2 knit stitches in order to decrease. So the next peg, which is 23, you're also going to knit off. Alright, so there are your first 2 knit stitches, and now you're going to take that loop off of peg 23, bring it over to peg 24, and you're going to knit off that stitch. Alright, you knit off, and then you're going to take that loop from peg 24 back to peg 23, and now you're done. This is your knit stitch, and now your next one will be a purl because you've started your rib stitch. And as you can see, you also have 1 less stitch on your loom. Alright, so let's continue with the rib stitch. Here's a knit. I'm going to knit. Now I marked my loom before I started, so every other peg I have a rubber band which tells me where to knit and where to purl. You don't need to do this. This just helps me keep up with my stitch pattern. Again, here is a purl, and next I'm going to do a knit stitch. And after I do this knit stitch, I'll break down the purl stitch for you. So I knit off my knit, and for my purl I take my hook and scoop my working yarn up, create a new loop, take the old one off, put a new one on, and pull. That's a purl stitch. And my next one then will be a knit stitch. That's the pattern. 1 knit, 1 purl. continue all the way back to peg 1. We're back at peg 1 and we're going to go ahead and knit this last stitch in the row. We did a bind off on the other side, now we need to do this one. So we're going to turn around and we're going to knit first. We're going to knit these first 2 stitches, peg 1 and peg 2. We're going to do a basic U-wrap knit stitch and then we're going to do the bind off. So we take the stitch off of peg 2, put it on peg 1, tighten. We're going to knit off peg 1 and take the stitch, the loop, and move it over to peg 2. Now we've done the bind off and we're ready to move on to the rib stitch. So I want you to see this real clear. Alright, so this one has a little rubber band and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a knit, because I'm on to my rib stitch now. And remember, it's a knit 1, purl 1, so the next one is a purl stitch. Now I did want to tell you guys that this decrease depends on the bottle you're going to use. This is the bottleneck section. So if you don't want to do this because you're doing, for instance, a water bottle, then don't decrease. Just do the rib stitch to help the cover stay in place. The rib stitch stretches and contracts and that helps to keep things in place, and you don't have to do as many rows as we're going to do here. Alright, we're back at the end of the row and this is peg 23 because we already did a bind off on peg 24. So you see these last 2 have already been the bind off has been done. We're going to do it now on peg 23. So just like before, we're going to turn around and we're going to do 2 knit stitches because it's knit 2, bind off 1, right? So here's the second knit stitch and then we're going to take that loop from that peg, which is 22, and move it over to peg 23. Tighten, knit off, take that loop and move it over, and now we did that bind off and we're ready to move on now to our rib stitch. So you know the drill. Knit 1 because the little rubber band is there. I'm going to knit off and my next stitch is what? You know, it's a purl. So we're going to do a purl stitch and then continue the pattern all the way to the other end because we need to bind off 8 pegs so that we're left with only 16 stitches on the pegs, or in other words 16 pegs with stitches. That's what we should be left with after we bind off 8 pegs. For the last 2 rows, you just need to knit. Alright, time to bind off, and we're going to use the drawstring bind-off. Okay, on these two last pegs, we are going to knit, just like we've been doing all this time when we're decreasing, right? We knit those first two pegs. And then we take the loop off of the second peg and bring it back to the first one. We are going to then knit off and bring the loop back over again. Now from this point on, we're only going to knit the second peg. Then take it off, bring it back to the first peg, tighten, knit off, and take that loop and move it over. Alright, let's do that again. We're going to knit off the second peg only. Take the loop, move it back to the first peg, knit off, bring that loop back. You got it? Knit off the second peg, knit off, take the loop off, and move it back. Knit off, move the loop forward, and keep going until you've finished and you've done all of your pegs. When you're at the last two, you knit off that very last peg, you take it off the loop and move it back, and you're going to knit off not just this one time. You're going to come back and knit a second time just to secure your work. And then you can take your scissors and you can cut off the excess yarn. I probably left a tail that was way too long because I don't really need that much. You're going to take this yarn and you're going to basically weave it in. Alright, so pull it out, and then you can tighten it to make a knot. And at this point, you have to stretch your stitches. If you don't stretch them, they look funny. And then you could start pulling on that cast on, because this is the bottom of your cover, and you want to close it up. So once you've stretched out your stitches, you can turn it inside out, and we're going to get a needle, thread the needle, finish closing it up, and with your needle you're going then to sew in a circular manner and continue pulling on that working yarn and closing that little hole. You could just do it a few times. You don't have to do it a bunch. Just enough to get it nice and closed, and you're like weaving in the working yarn. Alright, then make a knot. Get your scissors, cut off the excess yarn, and put it to a side because it's probably not going to be long enough. You want a lot. And once your work is closed up, you need to weave in that end. So with a crochet hook, we're going to weave in that last one, and you want to kind of round it off, so weave and kind of pull it in, and that's going to keep it from having, like, you know, a corner on one side and it's kind of rounded off on the other. So as you weave this in, just try to pull in that little corner again so that it gets circular instead of pointy. Well, it's time to put your bottle in your cover. So go ahead and just pull the cover up, and you custom fit it so it doesn't have to be perfect. And as you can see, the bottom fits well. Pull it up as high as you want, and then you're going to get your string and you're going to put it at the very tip because you're going upward. And sorry that my camera is a little blurry here. I don't know why, but it is. You can still see what I'm doing though. With your crochet hook, you're basically going to crisscross the thread, and don't worry that it's not perfect. You really can't tell, I promise you. Just make sure that you're bringing it from one end to the next, again in like a crisscross technique. And just keep going all the way up, and try to leave yourself a tail that's long enough that when you're ready to take the cover off of this bottle, you can do that, because we're going to put some ornamental jewelry, like the bindings on jewelry. And if you don't make this long enough, when you go to take it off the bottle, it won't give and the cover won't come off. So make sure that that you have enough of it. And the reason I put the little ornamental findings is because the string is so long, and I want it to look like I did it on purpose, and for, you know, decorative reasons instead of for practical reasons. And try to take your string all the way to the top, just basically feeding it through the little holes. They don't need to be like buttonholes, so just the opening in the stitches is fine. Try to find the openings that, you know, that are strong enough, right? Right, then all you have to do is just pull on the two ends of the string and tighten it up. Every now and then you got to pull on that string to finish feeding it through, and there you go. See, it is like custom fit. It's perfect. Now all you're gonna do is go ahead and tie a knot. I'm doing like a bow, and as you can see, you can't really tell that it's not all nice and fancy in the back. It looks fine. And have your string the way you want it, and then all you have to do then is get the edges on the string, on the working yarn, and you're going to make a little knot, because you don't want the string to like unravel, and you want the finding to have something to hold on to. Try to get that knot as close to the edge as you can make it. And then to make things a little neater, you're going to get your scissors and you're going to cut those little edges, right? Just cut as close to the little knots as you can without cutting the knot. Then you're going to get the little clasps and put it on the little hole, because it has two functions, and one of them is to hide that little hole, and the other is to hold your charm. So you need to get a jump ring. This is an open jump ring, and with your needle nose pliers, you're going to put it through the clamp, get your charm and attach it, and then just close your open jump ring and you're done. There you go. Now that's the first one, and of course it's a little heart because it's Valentine's right now. That's the time of the season, and so I thought those would be cute. And here's the second one. That's it. You're done. One of your bottles is done. And here are a few more for some more ideas.